that have become familiar gone.
A happy weekend to you from inside the Lighthouse. I am your host, poet and writer from the Bay Area, Finn Bell. Pleased to be bringing you another episode of your favorite poetry web show. With us in the studio today is poet Joan Kwon Glass. Joan's first full-length poetry collection, Night Swim, won the 2021 Diode Poetry Prize. Her micro chapbook, How to Make Pancakes for a Dead Boy, won the Harbor Edition's Marginalia contest. She is also the author of the chapbook, If Rust Can Grow on the Moon. Joan holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from Smith College, serves as poet laureate for the city of Milford, Connecticut, and is poetry co-editor for West Trestle Review. Joan has been nominated multiple times for the Pushcart Prize and the Best of the Net. Welcome to our Lighthouse, Joan.
Thank you so much for that beautiful welcome. I'm so incredibly honored to be here.
It is our pleasure and honor. Joan, I think we have all a poem of our own that we seek out for one reason or another, because of the sound of its words, the feeling it places within us. What is your one poem that you have been circling back to recently, and why?
A poem of my own, or
a poem of your own?
A poem of my own.
Yes.
Definitely the poem that I plan to read tonight. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to read this particular poem. It's called The Worst Thing. So if you take a moment to consider what the worst thing is in your life to have happened to you, and what can be done with that memory, what processes would follow after that to recover from it, to understand it, and to make meaning from it. That's the meaning behind the title, The Worst Thing. I'm also teaching a class, actually, that I named The Worst Thing, and it's a course on writing through grief.
Oh,
so I come back to this particular poem, and it means so much to me because it's really about life cycles and how one moment is connected to the other in the universe. And then sometimes you recognize or realize that that's happened, but you don't, it's not something that can be realized until it's time.
Yes.
To be realized.
Exactly. There's no more bigger truth about that than what you just said. And also I am deeply comforted and heartened by the fact that you are offering this class on grief, on how to process grief through writing, a grief writing class. I do hope that you share a little bit more about that later on. Folks, we shall go on break now, and when we return, we'll talk more with our guest. You returning from the break with us as we sit down with Poet Laureate of Milford, Connecticut, and author of Night Swim, Joan Kwon Glass. Joan has been so kind, folks, to share with us a single heartbreakingly moving poem titled The Worst Thing. Joan, if you would please honor us with a reading of that poem.
Thank you so much, Finn. This poem is called The Worst Thing, as Finn said, and it is part of my collection, Night Swim, at Diode Editions. It appeared first in The Night Heron Barks. This poem refers to moments in time that are connected, the ways in which the universe brings our grief from one point to another and shows us how cycles work. It's also set in a shopping mall. um, but essentially, it's about grief and it's about memory and it's about how at one point you can understand something that you could not have understood unless the worst thing has happened. So here is the worst thing. When I think of grief, I remember the time I ran into Mrs. Arabeau outside Somerset Mall, 2 years after her daughter, my friend Dolores, died of ovarian cancer. I was carrying bags out when I saw her standing next to the revolving doors, smoking a cigarette, watching the cars turn from the parking lot onto the highway as the sun began to set. She didn't see me, and I should have kept walking. If I had understood then what I understand now about grief, I would have left her alone in peace with her view of the fading light. But since I knew nothing yet, I touched her arm, smiled gently. Hello. She blinked. Her shoulders fell forward, and her face suddenly became a torn page, crumpled and aged. I'm sorry, she cried, and ran back into the mall. Her cigarette dropped on the ground, gave off what heat it still held. Then, nothing. It's 5 years later. I'm with my sister at the same mall. We're here because my sister wants to buy her son's favorite candy to put in his casket with him. Haribo raspberries, the kind that look like real raspberries and are almost too sweet. The nightmare of his death is bramble bright. We are 2 women walking in a shopping mall, buying candy for a dead boy. Today, the crime scene company will scrub his blood from the hardwood floors, and at his funeral tomorrow, we will tuck the candy into his hand, which feels like a hardening clay version of his hand. And I will spend 6 hours hugging his classmates and their parents. Most, if not all of them, will become taller, older versions of themselves, while my nephew will forever be 11 with an exit wound above his left temple. My 16-year-old son says the worst thing about loss is what you no longer hear. Sounds that have become familiar, gone. Coffee grinding in the morning, gone. Dogs whining at the door, gone. CBS News on TV in the morning, gone. Their laughter, gone. But no, he was wrong. What I know now and what I wish I had known the day I ran into Mrs. Arabeau at Somerset Mall all those years ago is that what is worse than silence, what is worse than their absence, is that the world is so full of everyone else. I want to go back to the revolving door, wave the living through as she smokes until every last one has passed. Then, when it's finally dark, tell her it's okay. Go now. The coast is clear. Thank you.
So, in the final stanza of that poem, you had the lines, "What I know now and what I wish I had known the day I ran into Mrs. Arabo at the Somerset Mall all those years ago. Is that what is worse than silence? What is worse than their absence is that the world is so very full of everyone else." We all like to say that grief has touched all our lives. But until grief is front and center, personal, in our face, you find that you don't really know it. You, your poems, what you just shared with us, come closest to the words that I still have to grapple with, trying to find in my own personal experience with grief. What do you think it is that unnerves people so much when they discuss or think of discussing death? That all their well meaning words, all their well meaning intentions land so far opposite of being comforting, and they instead cause further hurt.
I don't know that they're even having gone through the loss of 2 family members to suicide as I have. I don't know that there's anything that I can offer. I mean, that may sound strange because I've written 2 books about acute grief and the grieving process, but so many people have not made it this year. I've known so many people who have died, and in the past few years especially,
Yes.
and I have found myself at a loss for words that are comforting because there truly is no comfort. And I think that that's one of the reasons why people approach grief. Many people approach grief that the way that they do, which is to hold the deceased in a sort of sainthood, um, to try to forget anything negative associated with the lost one's death, regardless of how the death occurred or what happened right before the death, is a way of for us to sort of cope and survive, to survive that loss. You know, to think of our lost loved ones as angels or saints, or to suddenly make them better people than they were, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
being completely honest.
Yeah.
And in my writing, I refuse to do that. And I think that I know that it really does unnerve people. I've lost friends in this process because of my anger, because I was open and honest about my anger. Um, my nephew died by suicide, and he used his mother's unsecured loaded weapon.
Yeah.
And so when 2 months later she also took her life, I felt the only feeling that I could be I know I felt other things, but the feeling I was most conscious of was rage. And I do regret that, but how can you regret a feeling? It's a
Yes.
very strange experience. So to answer your question, I think people are uncomfortable with talking about grief and talking about death, especially to people who have lost people, because you want to be authentic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but truly there really is no comfort. I mean, other than maybe to be held. Now, when I know someone who has lost someone, especially lost someone unexpectedly, I just bring them food. You know, I make food. It's got to be homemade food. And I hug them and I don't really say much.
I never understood that, before the passing of my own mother, how, I used to think, what would food do? What would these nonverbal things like hugs do until it happened? And now I try, it's never perfect, even though you've gone through experiencing the grief of somebody close to you. You understand that you're not well equipped to deal with, and have you feel like you want to take away the pain that you felt from other people going through it. And I think you have to understand that you don't have all the tools at your disposal, but you can do your best by being there, by um, just the presence is, and knowing that you're there, and is powerful. And when you said about food, um, yes, because we neglect, we think that we are in this process of um, denying ourselves because it just seems disrespectful. So, let's be in this old fashioned mourning of not taking care of ourselves, but we're not doing anybody any sort of um, justice, or any, we're not helping ourselves, and we're not helping the rest of the people also grieving by doing this. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Um, and just verbalizing the fact of the anger, because people like to put it in the back and say that it's not right, but it is necessary. It is part of that process.
I know that it was for me. And I also know that neither of my books would exist if I hadn't allowed myself to feel it. I would not have written half of the poems in the books.
Yeah.
And when people reach out to me about my poems, it's almost always about the ones that I was hesitant to write, the ones where I was experiencing emotion in the grieving process. And I
Mhm.
felt like, wow, I really shouldn't be feeling this. But you know what? I'm going to feel it. It doesn't matter what's expected of me.
Yeah.
And those are the poems that people identify with.
Yes.
That's the beauty of poetry, you
Yes.
know?
That is true. Yeah. And um, I'm just hoping on your behalf that the poems that connect with people, the ones that people have gotten back to you and said that it helped them through. I hope that has also helped in your own process of your continuing healing. And I say continuing because we all know that there is no time limit to the process of your mourning and your grieving. It doesn't have to have, you know, I wonder about when people say, it's been this many years, aren't you over it yet? Um,
Mhm.
so
And you
thank
know
you.
what I would say to that? If someone asked me that question, I would say no. No, I'm not. And this is where I'm supposed to be. Wherever I am right now is exactly where I'm supposed
Exactly.
to be.
It's exactly where you're supposed to be.
Mhm.
That's enough said. That's just right there. Thank you for that, Joan. Thank you for sharing that piece of yourself, and the process you are in that journey of grief by sharing that poem. Um, as I was going over your other poems that you published in the past, I did come upon one that did catch my attention in particular, and that is Glass Menagerie. Um, in the journal Rupture, you have this poem included. And merely hearing this title, it brings me back to being 15 years old again and a junior in high school. And it brings me back to living in the South for a bit. And ultimately, it makes me recall the fragility and vanity that tangles up mother and daughter relationships. It also makes me summon up this broken inside of me to examine. Do you feel there's a peace found in a sense of control over seemingly small and broken things?
Oh my gosh, what an incredible question. I feel like I could talk about that question for a really long time. What my answer, I mean, that's a poem. The answer to that question really is a
Yes.
poem
Yes.
in and of itself. But, you know, the poem that you're referencing also took place in a mall in Michigan, a different mall. But it talks about, I don't know if they even have them anymore, but in Hallmark stores, they used to sell these little glass and ceramic animal figurines,
Yes.
and the poem is about those objects and really a metaphor for trying to, arranging those objects in my room and setting them up in a way. There's a line in the poem that says, they were always facing me.
Mhm.
And that's a very important line in the poem because it was at a time in my life when my father abandoned our family. He was a missing person for 5 years. He was just gone. And I was left with my mother, who was a single mother, first generation American. She
Mhm.
wasn't working, and she was very limited also in her ability to be an adult. And to be a parent. And so I found myself focused on these glass menagerie objects, these little animals, when, during this time when I had no control over
Yeah.
anything in my life, and there wasn't an adult that I could go to, until I met my ninth grade English teacher, who I'm still in touch with. I met him right around this time.
Mhm.
And I call him my adopted father because we're still very close to each other. But yeah, so I mean, don't we all do that? We try to, when we're feeling like we don't have control, we try to find something, whether it's
Oh, yes.
obsessing over the Christmas decorations or, obsessing over food. So absolutely. I think it's a very human thing. It's a very human thing.
Yeah, you made me in this poem. It's funny that you brought up obsessing over Christmas ornaments, because it did make me take out and examine things that I did um, in my youth and how that had shaped and what was the origin point of why I did develop those behaviors. Why did I want to be the person who decorated the tree to exact specifications, put the topper on? There was that sense of not being able to do that, and it shifted my world. I couldn't understand it then, and now I try to re-examine and understand what deficiencies, what was I making up for, and what I can heal in this moment now that I understand it.
Love that.
Thank you. Yes. This is very healing for me, Joan. Thank you
It
so
is
much
for
for
me.
this.
This is wonderful.
This was wonderful. Yes. Um, I have one last question to close us out with. Um, we've been poets in isolation for the past 2 years. What about these past 2 years of being a poet removed from other people mostly, where we're interacting via face-to-face time on computer screens that we're doing right now, Zoom meetings. What about that has been the most surprising revelation to you?
Hmm. Well, I'm very good at it. I'm very good at being isolated. Um, I'm kind of like a devoted introvert, you know? Like, I love to sit like this afternoon, a very rare moment of silence, and I
Yes.
was just sitting, listening to the occasional car go by, listening to the wind chimes, just listening for what can be heard in silence or in quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very comfortable with it. Um, but as far as what was most surprising, I think was how deeply I went inside myself
Mm.
because I wrote 4 books in a year. It was all during COVID.
Yes.
It was all during that isolation, and, I think what surprised me was how not lonely I felt on my own. It was really an opportunity for me, and of course, I was never really alone. I mean, I have 3 children, I have a house full of people, but there was more time. I have a almost 90-minute commute each way to work. I had that time. I wasn't going out to see friends. Um, and so in that time, just how deeply I was able to access that creative part of my brain, um, I think did surprise me. And actually, sometimes I wonder if I'll ever have that again, because for me, I've been back in person doing everything for quite a
Mhm.
while now, and I miss that. The quiet. I miss the solitude. I used to set my alarm for 4 o'clock in the morning because that's what time I would usually get up anyway, and use that time to write. And right now, that's not where my head is and where my
Mm.
heart is. It's not in writing. I really haven't written much in the last 6 months. So I guess, yeah, what surprised me was just how deeply I could go inside.
Yeah.
And what, I'd like to try to apply that in other areas of my life, that I have that ability to do that, with a little bit more noise and interaction.
Yes. But isn't it amazing how the silence does talk to you when you just sit there
I
and,
love it.
yeah, listen to the rhythm, like you said, of just cars or wind chimes. They're all telling you something. They're all telling you something.
Well, I live in a house that was built in 1780. I live in
Okay.
an antique house, and so at night, the house speaks. The
Mm.
house speaks to me, the floorboards, the windows, the doors. Um, so I do get that at night. I love it.
I love it too. I don't know. That pleases me to find out that I share that with you when we moved into this latest place. Granted, it's just a mid-century house, but it creaks. It
Mhm,
has history. The windows rattle, and all these elements are speaking to me. The way that the wind rustles through and whistles,
mhm.
they're all sounds that are speaking their language, and trying to convey something to me,
I
something
love that.
mysterious.
I love that, the language of the house,
Yes.
there's another poem right there.
There you go. Yes. I can't express enough. Words at this point don't quite suffice to say how much of a blessing it was to sit down with you, Joan.
Thank you.
Seriously, this is a blessing. This was healing and centering to do this, but unfortunately, we are at our times, and the best things always have to come to some sort of stop, but hopefully not an entire end. um, so I want to thank you for being here. And I want to thank all our Poet Lighthouse viewers for keeping us company, for keeping Joan and myself company by continuing to come in here and sit with us and listen in and absorb everything that was shared today. Please check out Joan's poetry collection, Night Swim, which is now available for pre-order through Diode Editions. How to Make Pancakes for a Dead Boy, available to purchase through Amazon. And watch out for If Rust Can Grow on the Moon, which is forthcoming in May of this year. You could follow Joan on Twitter at Joan P. Glass and on Instagram at Joan_Kwon_Glass, as well as read her previously published work on her page www.joankwonglass.com. Please continue to support all of the Poetry Global Network's excellent programming by subscribing to the channel and clicking the notification button to receive updates on our new episodes. For all things PGN, please go to www.poetryglobalnetwork.com. We hope you have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. My 16-year-old son says the worst thing about loss is what you no longer hear. Sounds that have become familiar, gone.